So President Trump says NATO and British troops stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. You were there. Was that the case?
No, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, it's one thing to have a frustration because NATO may not be investing as it should be, or the Western nations may not be investing, but it's completely wrong to draw any link and to try and denigrate the commitment of the British Armed Forces or the rest of the NATO members in what happened in Afghanistan, between about 2000, certainly between about 2006 and 2014, where, all troops of the alliance were absolutely engaged, particularly the British, the Americans and the Canadians, and others such as the Danish forces on the front line, and they were taking casualties. So to claim we're a little bit off it is completely rubbish.
So there was never a time when you were out there serving on the front line that you felt you weren't needed, as President Trump has suggested?
No, never. And in fact, I reported direct into an American Major General, and we were under pressure the whole time to get out and fight the Taliban, which we did relentlessly every single day. And we took casualties, as did every other British regiment and unit from the armed forces on a continual basis for nearly a sort of 10-year period. Hence the loss of nearly 500 British lives. And you have to remember that even nations which had much smaller armed forces like the Canadians and the Danish, between them lost nearly 100 troops fighting. And of course, has been said by the Prime Minister, rightly so, it's not just those tragically killed in action and the massive impact on their families, but also the thousands of British servicemen and women who were very badly injured and now live with life-changing consequences, having served their nation in support of their country and the other members of the alliance, including the Americans.
Indeed, and so apologies for interrupting. Yeah, we'll be speaking to one of those veterans in the next hour. You mentioned the Prime Minister there. Were you pleased with his comments? Did he go far enough, do you think?
I think Keir Starmer got it absolutely right. There will be people who will be insulted by this, absolutely right. As I mentioned before, there's no need for the administration to link any concerns they have about NATO funding to the actual prowess and performance of our very valiant, very gallant, and remember, volunteer members of our armed forces who risked their lives, and many of them made the ultimate sacrifice, and of course the massive impact on their families. So the Prime Minister was absolutely right to challenge the American president on this, he's wrong.
We were speaking to our Washington correspondent a little bit earlier, and he was saying that this has barely made headlines, this row or this sense that we have been insulted in the US. And I suppose there is a concern, isn't there, that people around the world will hear what the president says and believe those words. And what then does that do for the memory of those who were killed and for the families who lost loved ones, nearly 500 armed military personnel?
Well, it has a devastating effect on them. But that's why I think it's so important that the Prime Minister is robust on this issue. I think you'll find that there are a lot of American servicemen who will be dismayed that their president has said this, because they have served shoulder to shoulder with British forces and indeed other NATO forces. And particularly, there is a special relationship you need to remember between the British military and the American military. And it's not just Afghanistan, but it's other operations, such as Iraq, where we lost 179 British service men and women. So I think we'll find that even in the home front in America, as well as across the world, that people will realize that the American president has been very wrong to in any way imply that British forces were not fully engaged on the front line, taking casualties, taking risk, and working and providing a massive level of really important support to their American allies.
Of course. And Colonel, just briefly to finish, you mentioned NATO a moment ago. How worried are you about the transatlantic relationship?
Well, I think we have a right to be concerned, notwithstanding what we've just spoken about, that there has been a massive underinvestment in the alliance. I think the Americans are right to be concerned about the lack of investment from the Western European nations, and that is beginning to change. But you don't change it by making these shoot from the hip, throwaway comments, which are in effect insult to the memory of all those soldiers, both American and non-American, who've laid down their lives in operations, especially and not least of which is in Afghanistan.